In the eerie dusk of the Arizona prairie, a haunting figure stood barefoot and bound, a grain sack shrouding her head like a veil of forgotten nightmares. She didn't flee or flinch, just waited in defiant stillness, as if daring destiny to strike. Her dress clung damply to her knees, hands tied with frayed rope. The rough burlap knotted tight at her neck, concealing a mystery that would unravel a man's soul. No eye holes, no slits, just suffocating burlap and oppressive silence. Behind her, the vast prairie winds whispered secrets of abandonment, carrying scents of sage and scorched earth, amplifying the agony of being cast aside like worthless dust. Rancher Wyatt Harlan froze, his gaze locked on her tragic form. She offered no plea, no story, only a faint whisper bridging the gap. Please take them off. And that's when his fingers, calloused from work and war, reached for the knot behind her head, and everything he thought he understood about cruelty and kindness changed. But before that moment, before the knot slipped and the sack fell, we need to go back to the start of the week, to the first time the girl's name was erased. Wyatt Harlan, a rugged 38-year-old rancher hardened by the endless horizons of the Arizona territory, didn't go to town unless he had to. Most days he preferred the sound of fences creaking and cattle grunting over talk of border skirmishes or eastbound trains chugging through the canyons. His ranch sat 6 miles out of Sagebrush Hollow, a patch of hard-earned land he kept alone after his brother's passing and his father's slow decline into the unforgiving grip of old age and isolation. He wasn't bitter, just tired, his sun-leathered skin telling tales of battles fought, not just against the land, but against the memories that clung like burdos to his soul. He fed his horses before himself, repaired what broke with quiet hands, and kept a single photograph tucked beneath his mattress. A woman he almost married before the fever took her, her image now faded like the trails in a dust storm. That was Wyatt's world: dirt, sweat, memory, and silence. But that Tuesday, he rode into town for nails and salt, the clip-clop of his mare's hooves stirring up more than just the dry ground. Didn't plan to stay long, didn't want to get pulled into anything. And yet, by the time his boots hit the saloon's wooden planks, the shouting had already begun. "You can't just leave her there," a woman's voice snapped. "She's not our problem anymore," came a gruff reply. Wyatt paused. Inside, near the corner, Miss Eliza Hawthorne, the widow who ran the boarding house, stood with her arms crossed, trembling. She was sold like an animal, she said, and when the buyer saw her face, he left her in the dust with nothing but a warning. "What warning?" Wyatt asked quietly. Eliza turned, startled. "The kind that makes a girl cover herself in shame," she said. "They tied a sack on her, told her she'd curse any man who looked upon her." Wyatt frowned, his mind flashing to the ghost towns he'd ridden through, where superstitions lingered like smoke from old campfires. "Where is she?" Eliza hesitated. Then South Road, 3 miles past the split, just standing there amid the cactus shadows. Wyatt didn't ask more. He just nodded once, then left his sack of nails behind, and rode out into the dying light, the setting sun turning the desert into a sea of crimson and regret. She didn't move when she saw the horse, didn't lift her head. The sack made sure of that. Her dress, a pale, thin thing, clung to her legs from sweat or river water, or both, the fabric stained with the red earth that marked every soul in these parts. Wyatt dismounted slowly, boots sinking into dry dirt. "You all right?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "Nothing, just breath." He stepped closer. "I don't mean you harm." Still nothing. Then, like her throat hadn't worked in days. "They said if I took it off, someone would strike me." Wyatt's jaw clenched. "Who said that?" She flinched at the anger in his voice. "Please," she whispered, "take them off." He reached forward slowly and steady, found the knot behind her neck. It had been cinched with something crude, coarse rope, or a twisted rawhide belt. He worked it loose, thread by thread, his thoughts wandering to the scars he'd earned in the Civil War skirmishes along the border, where mercy was as rare as rain. And then gently he lifted the sack away. She winced at the air as if it burned, and when her face emerged, freckled, bruised near the jaw, one lip split, he froze. Because she wasn't hideous. She wasn't cursed. She was terrified and young, too young to be standing alone in the dark like that, too hurt to have survived what she clearly had, her green eyes reflecting the fading light like hidden oases in the desert. Her eyes wide, unsure, met his, and she braced herself as if waiting for the blow. It never came. Wyatt swallowed hard. "You want to come inside?" he asked. She blinked. "I don't need pity." "You don't have pity," he said. "You've got blood on your foot." She looked down, didn't answer. He held out his hand. She didn't take it, but she followed. Back at the ranch, Wyatt didn't ask questions. He just handed her clean water, a boiled potato, and an old shirt she could wrap around her shoulders, the garment carrying the faint scent of leather and wood smoke from his solitary evenings. She sat near the hearth, legs curled beneath her, hands shaking so badly she spilled the first sip. He didn't comment, didn't touch her, just waited. The crackling fire filling the room with a warmth that felt tentative, like the first spring bloom after a harsh winter. After 20 minutes, she finally spoke. "They gave me to him," she whispered. "The man who bid highest, but he didn't want me after." Wyatt didn't look up. "Because of your face?" She hesitated. "No, because I didn't speak, and now they said I was a curse, that I'd bring ruin if a man looked too long." Wyatt exhaled through his nose. "That's not how curses work, not in these lands where the real curses are drought and broken promises." She managed the hint of a smile, then said, "My name is June." He nodded. "I'm Wyatt." She held her hands close to her chest like they still ached from the ropes. And then after a silence that felt bigger than the room, she said, "I don't want to curse you. You won't," he replied. "But you already changed something." "What?" Wyatt looked at the sack folded neatly by the hearth. The silence. The next morning the wind changed, not with storm or scent, but with something quieter, the kind of shift only a man who lived alone could feel. It moved like unease through the mesquite trees, through the dust. Through the way, Wyatt found himself watching the edge of the fence line while June washed her bruised hands in a basin of warmed rainwater, the water drawn from the small well he'd dug himself years ago. She hadn't asked to stay, but she hadn't asked to leave either. And Wyatt wasn't the kind to push a girl back into the cold because the world had treated her worse than an animal. She still flinched if he moved too fast, still pulled her sleeves low, like hiding the rope burns would make her feel less real. The mark's a testament to the brutal trade routes where lives were bartered like pelts. But she was eating now, and that alone felt like something sacred in town. The rumors had grown teeth, a girl in a sack, a rancher alone with her. Some said she was Comanche. Some said she was cursed. Some said Wyatt had finally cracked like his father before him, succumbing to the loneliness that gripped men in these wide-open spaces. But Wyatt didn't care much for town talk. He had fences to mend and horses to feed. And now a girl in a spare room who stirred at night like someone still trapped in a dream she didn't ask for, her murmurs blending with the coyotes' distant howls. That afternoon, he came back from the pasture to find her holding his mother's old Bible. She wasn't reading it, just holding it the way someone might hold a warm brick to their chest in winter. "It belonged to her?" she asked. He nodded. She believed in hell. She believed in mercy. June ran her fingers along the cracked leather. "I never learned to read." Wyatt didn't answer, just poured her a mug of water and sat on the porch steps beside her. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was shared, like two people listening for the same distant sound neither could name, perhaps the rumble of an approaching herd or the whisper of ghosts from the canyon walls. That evening, he lit the lantern slower than usual. June sat by the fire, hair damp from washing, wearing one of his shirts rolled at the sleeves. She looked small but not broken. Not anymore. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" he asked gently, his voice steady like the steady trot of a trail horse. June looked at the flames, then nodded. "They took us from the rail station in Tucson. Me and 4 others. Promised work, food, maybe marriage." She swallowed hard. "They lined us up like cattle at a branding. One of them asked me to smile. I didn't. So he tied the sack over my head. Said if I wouldn't look pretty, I wouldn't look at all." Wyatt's jaw flexed. "They bid anyway." She nodded. "They said I'd be quiet, obedient. Good for night work, that's what he said. The man who bought me, did he hurt you?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "He took one look when the sack came off, called me a devil, and kicked me off his wagon. Left me with a rope in that same sack." She looked up at Wyatt. "I thought he'd kill me. I wanted him to, but he didn't even think I was worth the bullet." The wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters like skeletal fingers tapping for entry. Wyatt stirred the fire. the iron poker scraping like a blade across memory. I was in the war, he said, eyes still on the coals. Saw worse than bullets. Saw men turn into ghosts long before they fell, their spirits shattered by the endless marches through scorched valleys and ambush-ridden passes. That's what they did to you, he said quietly. Tried to turn you into a ghost. She looked down at her hands. They almost did. Wyatt leaned back. But you're still here. In the morning, the dog barked twice, not at a coyote, at something closer. Wyatt stepped onto the porch and saw dust rising from the south road, like a warning plume from a distant signal fire. Two riders, both armed, moving too slow to be travelers, too direct to be lost. He set his jaw, turned to June. Stay inside. Don't open the door. She nodded, eyes wide. Wyatt grabbed the shotgun from above the hearth and stood in the doorway, silent. The riders stopped 50 feet from the house. One leaned forward. Looking for a girl, he said, red hair. Where's a sack? Last I heard, Wyatt didn't blink. Don't know anyone like that. The man grinned. Bet she came limping down this way. Pale little slip of a thing. Pretty underneath, they say. Wyatt raised the barrel slightly. You lost. The second rider nudged his horse. We ain't here for a fight, friend. Just want what's ours. She ain't yours. The first man tilted his head. She's bought property, not anymore. The men exchanged a glance, then turned their horses without another word and rode off slow, but not gone, just circling like buzzards over a wounded deer in the arroyo. Wyatt watched them disappear down the ridge, the dust settling like unresolved tension, then shut the door. Inside, June sat with her knees pulled to her chest. The sack folded on the table beside her like a skin she'd shed, but still feared would crawl back. They'll come back, she whispered. Maybe, Wyatt said, but next time they won't be leaving standing. That night, Wyatt sat up with the shotgun across his knees, eyes fixed on the firelight flickering against the log walls. June stayed curled beneath a quilt in the corner. Her breathing steady, her body still, but her fingers. They held tight to the hawk feathers she'd found weeks ago, drifting on the fence post the morning after the sack was taken off. To her, it meant something. Freedom, maybe flight, or just proof that someone somewhere had seen her and not looked away. A talisman against the vast, indifferent wilderness. The men came back on the third night, but this time there were 4. No lanterns, no voices, just hoofbeats, slow and heavy, muffled by damp earth and cowardice. Wyatt heard them before they reached the house. The way a rancher hears things when his life depends on it. The breathing of the horses, the clink of saddle irons, the pause just outside the gate. He stepped out before they knocked. Shotgun at his side. A single oil lamp lit the porch, casting long shadows across his boots. You weren't invited back, he said calmly. The lead man, same one who'd grinned last time, dismounted, lean, ugly, with eyes that didn't blink enough. His name, Wyatt remembered now, was Silas Teller, known for gambling, drinking, and making girls disappear near border towns. His reputation as dark as the midnight trails he haunted. Silas spat into the dirt. She belongs to the man who paid, he said. You hiding her? That makes you a thief. Wyatt didn't flinch. She's not property. Silas stepped forward. She's a curse. Inside the cabin, June stood with her hand gripping the edge of the table. She heard every word. Her breath came shallow. She didn't cry. She didn't move. She remembered how they'd looked at her like something shameful, something not quite human. But she wasn't under a sack anymore, and she wasn't alone. I should shoot you where you stand, Wyatt said, voice low. But you won't, Silas replied. You're a good man. Good men hesitate. That was the moment June opened the door barefoot, wrapped in Wyatt's old quilt. No sack on her head, a thud, no shame in her eyes, only a whisper. Why are you afraid of me? The other 3 men turned. Even Silas hesitated. June stepped into the porch light, bruises fading but visible, hair loose around her shoulders. You beat me. You sold me. You tied me up and said I'd bring ruin. She stepped closer to Silas. But you're the one trembling. He backed up half a step before catching himself. Wyatt raised the shotgun again. You'll ride out now, he said, and if I see you near this ranch again, I'll bury what's left of you on the hill. Silas's mouth worked but said nothing. He turned, mounted, and they left. No fight, no words, just retreat. When the dust settled, June didn't speak for a long time. She sat on the edge of the porch, hands trembling only after they were gone. Wyatt poured her a mug of water and sat beside her. "You didn't have to come out," he said. "I did," she whispered. "I needed them to see my face." He looked at her, really looked, and saw not a victim, but someone climbing out of a grave someone else had dug for her, her resilience shining like the resilient wild mustangs that roamed the distant bluffs. The town heard about it, of course. Sagebrush Hollow always did. Some said Wyatt had gone mad, pointing guns at honest men. Others said the girl had bewitched him, but the sheriff came by 2 days later with a flask and a silent nod. "You did right," he said. "They won't try again." Wyatt didn't ask how he knew, didn't need to. Some men like Silas only understood fear, and now they'd felt it from someone they'd never expected. A girl they'd called Cursed, who stood straighter than all of them combined. By the next week, June was walking the fence line in the early light, checking for breaks, helping Wyatt move the feed barrels, her presence bringing a new rhythm to the daily grind, like the gentle flow of a hidden spring. She didn't speak much, but she didn't flinch either. She laughed once, soft like it surprised her. When a chicken tried to peck her boot, she stopped wearing the quilt, started wearing Wyatt's mother's old boots, 2 sizes too big, but worn with pride. And once, just once, Wyatt caught her staring at her own reflection in the water barrel. Not with hate, but with recognition, as if seeing the strength forged in the fires of adversity. One evening, rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady. Wyatt stood on the porch, watching the fields soak, the land drink, the rare desert rain transforming the arid soil into a tapestry of life renewed. June came beside him, arms folded, eyes up. She turned to him. "I used to pray someone would find me," she said, "but not to save me, just to see me." He didn't answer. She leaned her head against his arm gently. "They always said my face would drive men mad." "It will," he replied quietly, "because it makes them reckon with what they did." She looked up. "What do you see?" Wyatt turned to her. "I see a girl standing where she wasn't supposed to survive." June swallowed, then asked the only thing that mattered anymore. "Am I still a ghost?" "No," Wyatt said. "You're the reason I stopped living like one." Thunder rolled far off, and for the first time in months, the land didn't feel like it was holding its breath. It exhaled. So did she. The first time June let the river touch her scars. She didn't flinch. Wyatt watched from the other bank, pretending to be occupied with mending a fence post. But his hands barely moved, his heart swelling with unspoken admiration. She stood knee-deep in the water, her reflection scattered by the current. Her arms were bare. Rope burns faded to pale ridges. Her jaw, once swollen from fists, had softened. She tilted her face upward, letting sunlight warm the skin that had been hidden for so long. There was something holy in the way she stood, like the river had made space just for her, like the wind had stopped blowing just to listen, the babbling waters whispering ancient tales of healing and rebirth. She cupped water in her hands and poured it over her shoulders, her ribs, the place on her neck where the sack had once choked off her breath. And then she looked up across the stream directly at Wyatt. "I want to stay." He didn't respond right away, not because he was unsure, but because sometimes you wait to answer a prayer out loud, even when it's already been granted, savoring the moment like a cool drink after a long ride. That night, she cooked. Nothing fancy, beans, a bit of pork, corn warmed in the skillet, but the gesture meant more than a feast, the aromas filling the cabin with a homely warmth that chased away the shadows of solitude. She moved around the cabin like she belonged to the space, like the floor knew her steps now, and the hearth didn't burn lest she was near it. Wyatt sat at the table watching the flames flicker against her cheek. She caught him staring. "What?" she asked, a little smile teasing her lips. "You're not the same girl who walked up to my fence with a sack on her head." She looked down, quiet. "Then I'm still her. I just don't carry the sack anymore." He nodded once. "That's good." I think she paused, chewing her bottom lip. "I think I want to make a life here, not just hide." Wyatt's hands tensed slightly around his mug. "You mean stay?" She nodded. "Help work. Earn my place." "You already have." June blinked. "I have." Wyatt stood up, walked over to the hearth, and reached into the small drawer built into the wall. He pulled out something wrapped in cloth, laid it gently in front of her. She unfolded it slowly, A pair of leather gloves stitched by hand, worn but strong. His mother's. I think she'd want you to have them. Wyatt said this land. She always said it belonged to the ones who could tend it, not the ones who bought it, her spirit still lingering in the worn leather like a guardian of the homestead. June said nothing for a long moment. Then she placed her hands inside them, and they fit. Not perfectly, but closely enough. By spring, people started talking again, but differently now. The shopkeeper called June Miss. Instead of girl, the preacher's wife invited her to Sunday supper, though Wyatt politely declined. And once an older ranch hand passing through stopped at the gate and tipped his hat. "You made it out," he said softly. June smiled back. Still making it, he nodded, then rode on, his words echoing the enduring spirit of survival in the West. One evening, a wagon came up the trail. June tensed when she saw it. Wyatt stepped onto the porch, shotgun resting quietly against the wall. But there was no danger, just a woman, thin, tired, her dress faded with a child in her lap. The woman's eyes met June's like she already knew her. "I heard you might be here," she said. "I was with you back in Tucson, before they split us." June's breath caught. The child in the woman's lap looked barely 4. "They told me you were taken," the woman whispered. "That they tried," June said gently. "But someone stopped them." The woman hesitated. "I don't have a place. He left. I got no money. No safe road." June looked at Wyatt. He didn't speak, just opened the barn door and pointed to the loft. "There's room." The woman began to cry. Not loudly, not broken, just soft. Like someone who finally let go of fear after years of clenching it tight, her tears mingling with the dust of the trail. June helped her down, held the child in her arms, and carried her inside. That night, as the stars stretched across the black sky, Wyatt poured June a cup of coffee. She wrapped her hands around it, fingers still in those old leather gloves. "I didn't know if I was allowed to matter," she said. "You don't need permission," Wyatt replied. She looked at him as clear now. Not defiant, just whole. "You think a person can be born twice? I think some are born once and buried early, but not all graves have dirt." June smiled at that, then leaned her head against his shoulder. Not seeking rescue, not asking for belonging, just resting like someone who finally knew she wasn't going to be erased. Her presence a quiet revolution against the harshness of the frontier. In the morning, she pulled the old sack from the drawer where she tucked it away, stepped outside, hung it from the fence post at the edge of the pasture like a flag. Let the wind take it, watched it flutter, then fall. She didn't pick it up, didn't need to. It wasn't hers anymore. Years passed quiet on the Harlan Ranch. Fences held, soil stayed kind. The porch creaked in summer and whistled in winter. And inside the small cabin that once held only grief and firewood, a different life began to take root, blossoming like wildflowers after a monsoon. June no longer walked like a ghost. She walked like the land belonged to her bones. She moved through the fields at sunrise with a soft authority. Not loud, not sharp, just sure. She could saddle a horse in under 2 minutes, drive a wagon straight through rain. And when something spooked the cattle, it was her voice that calmed them first, soothing like a lullaby carried on the breeze. People in town stopped whispering. They started waving. And though she never told anyone what the sack had felt like over her face, never described the heat, the panic, the stink of old grain and rope, she didn't have to. She had buried it right at the edge of the garden beneath the cottonwood tree. No marker, no words, just gone. The woman who'd arrived months before, the one with the small daughter and the cracked shoes, stayed too. Her name was Clara, her girl Emma. They took the south room and turned it into a sewing space. Clara stitched quilts out of old shirts and leftover canvas. Emma helped gather herbs and sorted nails into jars. There was laughter again, the kind that doesn't feel borrowed, the kind that doesn't ask permission, filling the air like the cheerful calls of meadowlarks at dawn. One day, June found a hawk feather near the barn door. Same as that first morning, back when she still trembled at creaking wood and sudden wind. She picked it up gently and smiled, not because it was a sign, but because it reminded her that everything, even wings, begin in silence, a symbol of the quiet strength that had carried her through the storms. It was Wyatt who asked first. No ring, no kneeling, just one soft sentence while they watched Emma splash in the creek. You ever think about staying forever? June didn't answer right away. She was plaiting her hair, fingers moving slow. I've thought about a lot of things, she said. He nodded, waited. She looked up. I want a name. Not one they gave me, not one I had before. Wyatt tilted his head. What name? June shrugged. Something new, something mine. He didn't laugh, didn't push. He just touched the side of her face. The same cheek that had once been bruised so deeply it purpled her temple. I'll call you what you ask me to, he said. Always, she kissed him that night. Not out of desperation, not out of debt, but because he'd seen her face when it was still covered and believed it held light, a beacon in the vast night of the prairie. That winter they married. No papers, no preacher. Just Clara sewing a blue ribbon onto a white linen dress. Just Emma scattering cedar branches along the porch rail. Just Wyatt standing in his best shirt, eyes shining but quiet while June stepped into the dusk and took his hand. I never thought I'd be anything more than the girl in the sack, she whispered. You were always more, he said. You just forgot for a while. They kissed as the fire crackled, and no one called it a wedding, but everyone knew it was, a union forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the gentle rains of hope. The land gave back after that. 2 good seasons of rain, 3 healthy calves, in a small cradle carved from cedar placed near the hearth one spring morning. Empty at first, then full of life a few months later. A daughter Wyatt wanted to name her Hope. June wanted something stronger, so they settled on Mercy because she wasn't born from pity or chance or luck. She was born because someone said, please take them off, and someone else listened. Years later, when June stood at the fence line watching the sun dip behind the canyon, Emma beside her and Mercy on her hip, she said something she hadn't said in a long time. I used to be afraid of my face. Emma looked up puzzled. Why? June smiled. Because someone told me it would ruin men. Emma shook her head. That's dumb. Very. Did it? June looked out across the field where Wyatt was brushing down a horse, sleeves rolled, humming something no one else knew the words to. She smiled again. No, but it did change one. When she died, old, full of years, wrapped in the same leather gloves Wyatt gave her decades ago, they buried her under the cottonwood tree beside the garden. No preacher, no crowd, just 3 women and a man who once said nothing louder than grief. They buried her with a feather in her hand and no sack in sight. And on her stone carved by Emma herself were only 5 words. She took it off forever, and far away in places where girls still trembled beneath burlap in silence. They whispered stories of a woman who wore no curse, who walked straight through shame, and who made her own name. A name strong enough to carry others. A name born the moment someone said, please take them off. And someone finally did.